Hey there, everybody. It's Sharon again from TheWrap. Welcome to TheGrill among our final panels. I'm really excited to introduce our next conversation. We're going to have the chance to see clips from the current documentary sensation, The Social Dilemma, and we're going to talk to its writer and director, Jeff Orlovsky. The film talks about the dangers to our society and our democracy of technology, the unintended consequences of internet connectivity, and the hidden hazards of social media. After I talk to Jeff, I'll be talking to Craig Duneloff, the co-founder of the privacy company, who's working on solutions to the challenges raised in the film. And now on to our conversation. Filmmaker Jeff Orlovsky was the director, producer, and cinematographer of the Sundance Award-winning films Chasing Ice and Chasing Coral. He is a two-time Emmy Award-winning filmmaker and founder of the award-winning production company Exposure Labs. His latest film, The Social Dilemma, premiered at the 2020 Sundance Film Festival and is streaming on Netflix and making quite a lot of noise. Let's go to a trailer of the film before we bring in Jeff.
When you go to Google and type in climate change is, you're going to see different results depending on where you live and the particular things that Google knows about your interests.
That's not by accident, that's a design technique. What I want people to know is that everything they're doing online is being watched, is being tracked. Every single action you take is carefully monitored and recorded.
A lot of people think Google's just a search box and Facebook's just a place to see what my friends are doing. What they don't realize is there's entire teams of engineers whose job is to use your psychology against you. I was the co-inventor of the Facebook like button. I was the president of Pinterest,
Google, Twitter, Instagram.
There were meaningful changes happening around the world because of these platforms. I think we were naive about the flip side of that coin.
You get rewarded by hearts, likes, thumbs up. And we conflate that with value, and we conflate it with truth.
A whole generation is more anxious, more depressed.
I always felt like fundamentally it was a force for good. I don't know if I feel that way anymore.
Facebook discovered that they were able to affect real world behavior and emotions without ever triggering the user's awareness. They are completely clueless.
Fake news spreads 6 times faster than true news. We're being bombarded with rumors.
Everyone's entitled to their own facts. There's really no need for people to come together. In fact, there's really no need for people to interact.
We have less control over who we are and what we really believe.
If you want to control the population of your country, there has never been a tool as effective as Facebook.
We built these things and we have a responsibility to change it. The intention could be, how do we make the world better?
If technology creates mass chaos, loneliness, more polarization, more election hacking, more inability to focus on the real issues, we're toast.
This is checkmate on humanity.
And welcome to Jeff Orlovsky.
Hello. Thanks for having me, Sharon.
Yeah, thanks for joining us from, I guess you're in Boulder, Colorado, where it's nice and safe, protected from social media, but not really. Let's just start with the fact that the film, first of all, congratulations on the film.
Thank you.
Very well done. My first question is, are you surprised by how much noise the film has made? There's not a day that goes by for me that it's not in my Twitter feed, people talking about it. Admittedly, I have a lot of media people in my Twitter feed, but it has certainly caught people's imaginations. Did that surprise you?
Well, first of all, it's amazing to hear. So I'm sort of grateful that the response has been so strong. I think that's always the dream that filmmakers have, that you make something that hits a zeitgeist, that hits a cultural moment, that people can sort of recognize something in the art and in the medium that speaks to them. I would say, I always had my fingers crossed and my extremely high hopes, but this has been above and beyond anything I could have hoped for with the film.
Mostly when I see commentary about people who've seen the film the night before, they wake up the next day, they feel the need to talk about it, is the word you see a lot, it's terrifying, it's scary, because there are these kind of apocalyptic terms that are used in the film, like it is game over for us as a society, game over for our democracy. Do you really think it is? I know you're letting other people speak. It's not necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, you're referencing quotes from others in the film.
Yes.
And the lines that some of the engineers and executives from these companies themselves, it's them that are saying those lines. I mean, it was a real shock to me at the beginning when working on this project. Our history, my team and my company, we've been working on a lot of climate change films for the last several years, because
which
that's
I've
always
seen,
been,
you're excellent, by the way.
So, thank you. Those have always been in my mind, like, this is a huge issue. We need to address climate change. What are we doing as a society? And then when I started to learn about what was happening with our phones, and not the phones specifically, it's certain business models on certain platforms that we're accessing through these devices that we're carrying with us 24/7. Some of our subjects reference this as a climate change of culture, where we have invisible code that is now reprogramming our society. The idea that we're living in the matrix is not actually that far off. We're living in this kind of warped view of reality right now because we've been fed particular things. Each and every one of us that's on one of these platforms, one of these algorithmic feeds coming from social media, we live, to quote somebody else in our film, Roger McNamee, we're each in our own Truman Show version of reality. We're being fed a customized version. If you think about it, I've been saying this once in a while lately, nobody knows what the president of the United States sees on his social media every day. Regardless of any stance that you have on President Trump, for or against, we don't know. Like, we can all see the billboard that he drives by, we can all see Fox News that he might watch, but nobody has any insight into the customized, programmed version of information that's being fed to him.
I'm going to take a wild leap and say that he doesn't do much consuming probably on Twitter. He's probably a guy who tweets out and then watches Fox News and tweets out and watches OANN, whatever that is. I mean, he's a traditional consumer of news, even though he uses Twitter like a lethal weapon.
You're speaking beyond my, obviously nobody knows exactly how he's using it, but when you look at retweets and when you look at some of the stories that he is repeating and amplifying, there's a question like, where are those coming from? True. And so I think there definitely is a meaningful amount of usage there that we don't know about. Yeah. But my point there really was just a matter of, like, we don't know what is being shown to him even if you were to go and rebuild an identical account of all of the same followers of all the same organizations that or places you might follow. We don't know in what order things are being shown and what and how. And I just bring that up as a very, very small example that is reflecting on our individualized filters that we all live in now. I've been saying to friends for a bit now, like, if you're getting your news from social media, I am not going to trust your opinion on the news, because you're getting a very, very particular algorithmically reinforced message that is based on your particular filter bubble. Well,
and that happens to be particularly true of Facebook, because Twitter is, what I choose, but Facebook is really what Facebook chooses. So I think that's worse. In fact, I'm not on Facebook. I've written about it a lot before. So one of the things that was sort of funny to me is that when I was reading all of these kind of, I saw this terrifying film last night. I'm like, okay, I should probably watch this thing, but maybe I should have a stiff drink before I do that. But it really turned out to be a lot of the figures and spokespeople and thought leaders who I've been following for a number of years and been writing about, and I've been quite critical of Facebook in my own in my column on TheWrap, as a publisher, as a free speech advocate, but also but free speech can't be like everybody all the time. There has to be intelligent limits to free speech. I feel odd actually even saying that, because I'm such a staunch free speech advocate, but obviously there's responsible speech and irresponsible speech, and Mark Zuckerberg doesn't seem to want to have to know the difference. Or there's toxic and deliberately misleading speech. But you're talking about something that's, well broader than just what Trump is doing or people narrowly being fed news, which is a very serious problem when we talked about. The film really goes far beyond that and talking about sort of the brain chemistry that is being impacted by the way these devices or these platforms have been engineered. We can just look at a quick clip, if you will, with me that talks about that. Can we take a look at that and then let's talk about it?
What I want people to know is that everything they're doing online is being watched, is being tracked, is being measured. Every single action you take is carefully monitored and recorded. Exactly what image you stop and look at, for how long you look at it. Oh yeah, seriously, for how long you look at it.
They know when people are lonely. They know when people are depressed. They know when people are looking at photos of your ex-romantic partners. They know what you're doing late at night. They know the entire thing. Whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, or what kind of neuroses you have, what your personality type is like.
They have more information about us than has ever been imagined in human history. It is unprecedented.
So a couple questions on that. First is, you took this interesting approach in that you do like a dramatization that's sort of woven through the film, which is like this family and how they're using social media and their devices. What was the idea behind that? And
a number of kind of converging ideas. I think from an artistic and creative perspective, our team really wanted to push ourselves. So what's the most creative way we could tell the story? As we were talking to all of our subjects, we started to understand this idea of a digital model that's being made of each and every one of us that has upwards of over 25,000 entries. Like my understanding is that Facebook has on average like 29,000 data points for people, which it's collecting from all the actions that we do. So when you think about like, what is my digital footprint? What is my digital avatar? What do they know about me, and how are they then building a model of everything that they've collected and reverse engineered from me, from my experience, from my life experience? It is that model that is being used to better profile us in a very direct sense for advertising. And if they know what my interests are, if they know what my personality is, what my mood is, what I'm vulnerable to or not, that is how I can be more effectively persuaded by an advertisement or an idea. In an ideal sense, from an advertising perspective, they'd love to advertise just to one person, right? As opposed to a billboard that gets averaged out to an entire city. If I can target Sharon explicitly and I know exactly what's going to work on you, I'll pay more money as an advertiser to have a higher efficacy rate of manipulating just one person. And in some ways that is like the service that they are selling. There's this common phrase, if you're not paying for the product, you are the product. Which comes into the film. So we wanted a creative and interesting way to bring that to life. So we were able to conceive of this narrative through line that interweaves throughout the documentary, throughout the subjects explaining it, that as we learn more and more about how it works, that story evolves and unfolds.
Yeah, I think that's very cool. So then now let's turn to some of the other sort of real life people who you got to talk to you in the film. We saw a couple of them there in the clip. There's people like Tristan Harris, who's is he one of the founders of Facebook?
No. Tristan was the a design ethicist at Google.
Oh, at Google. Okay,
so he was at Google as a design ethicist, and then tried to make change from inside the company, and felt like it didn't go anywhere, and then left and started speaking about this publicly. He's a co-founder of an organization called the Center for Humane Technology, that is trying to work on bringing humanity back to our technology.
To my point about the impact of film, because he's been doing that work for many years, but I think it does take the medium of a film like yours to break through. Because he's probably spoken to countless audiences. Other people you've talked to who are in the film, Jaron Lanier, who's a very critical thinker about the impact of these technologies in our society. The most amazing things are people are like these, and Jeff Siebert, who we just saw, who are actually people who worked at these companies, Pinterest, Google,
Facebook, Twitter, Google,
Wow.
YouTube.
and who had a moment of clarity about what it was that their work was affecting on the world. How did you
Right.
find them? How did you get them to talk to
Yeah.
you? It's like a confessional, you know?
Yeah, that's interesting. So in many ways, the whole genesis for the film, ironically, was I saw a post from Tristan Harris on Facebook where he was voicing, as a former Google employee, he was criticizing Google.
Mhm.
And, you know, I have so many friends who worked in the tech industry. I went to Stanford in the mid 2000s. And so it was that generation
Did
of
you
students and
study?
engineers.
Did you
I
study?
studied anthropology and was like really into film, and I started some tech startups with some friends, and we were building websites, and we were building, I mean, we had a startup around a new news organization many years ago that just didn't go anywhere. But it was those friends that ended up working at Facebook, at Twitter, at Google, et cetera. And so I heard Tristan start to speak about this and started reaching out to other people that I knew, like, hey, wait a second, this is what I heard from Tristan. I've never heard of this before. Is there something here? And I started going to other people to verify, like, what's going on here. And my instinct was to go to the people who worked in the industry that I had known of that, you know, were thinking about these things. Jeff Seibert was the first person that I went to, who was the former, basically the head of product at Twitter. Like, he was in charge of the consumer product. And his mindset was, you know, I was skeptical at first. I didn't understand it. I didn't get it. But when I listened to Tristan speak more at some events, he realized, wait a second, he's onto something. And I heard Jeff's kind of process and journey and realization. And that was really a starting catalyst for me, was hearing people who worked at these companies who designed this stuff that said, you know what, there's a problem with what we're doing. And so that was really the main concept and the genesis of the film. Like, I wanted to hear from the people who were inside the companies who made this and who had a perspective that was different from what we were hearing the companies say, you know, in all of the press that we had heard.
Well, when you say, when the title of the film is The Social Dilemma, like, what's the dilemma? Like, we've built this, what do we do with it?
Yeah, I think it's that. I think it's there are many dilemmas in some ways.
Like, the genie's out of the bottle, now what?
Yeah, exactly. I draw a comparison to the fossil fuel industry, I think it applies in a number of different ways, but at the birth of the fossil fuel industry, we were like, hey, look at this thing that we discovered that we can extract from nature, and it gives us all this power and opportunity. And only many years later did we say, well, wait a second, we're seeing the consequences of this now. And we're stuck with a dilemma right now. It's like, it's taking us a long time to switch off of fossil fuels. It's taking us a while to get to sustainable energy, to renewable energy. And that's a shift that we're making, and people don't want to give up certain things. They don't want to stop flying. In a pre-COVID world, around the reality of what climate change is doing to society. In that same analogy, the tech industry found this amazing way to connect everybody and to not charge anything. And look at this advertising business model. It seems too good to be true. And years later, we're sort of realizing this is sort of too good to be true, that there are consequences, that the incentive and the power that an algorithm can have to both grow the system and then to figure out how to get you to stay on and to figure out how to get you to come back. And all of the aspects of what this entire incentive structure demands and necessitates for continued growth has negative consequences on our society. And that's really at the heart of it, what my realization and discovery process was while learning about all of this and doing these interviews, that at the end of the day, there are many different issues we can talk about within technology, just like there are many issues we can talk about with the environment. But I really wanted to come back to, there is a business model whose incentives are misaligned with humanity. And if we continue down this path, it will continue to get worse. And if we want to help humanity and have a functioning society and democracy, and at the societal level and individual teen mental health, and really being able to protect our own mental health and kind of restore humanity to the world in some ways, we need to be rethinking the way this technology is designed, and we need to fundamentally change what we're measuring and what we're optimizing for.
We have a second clip.
Great.
Am I correct? Am I remembering correctly that the film talks about suicide rates?
Yes. Yeah.
And that was one of the truly
particularly in young girls.
alarming,
Yes.
which was that suicide rates have risen something like 60% among young people since the advent of social media, which is only about 15 years. Wouldn't that be about right? Is it 20? I'd say 15, right?
The real shift happened not at the start of social media, but when some of the new techniques were really implemented and the ways the algorithms had changed. But is this the clip that you have lined up?
The clip that we have, but I did want to mention it because this talks about the impact on kids. So let's cue the clip.
These technology products were not designed by child psychologists who were trying to protect and nurture children. They were just designing to make these algorithms that were really good at recommending the next video to you, or really good at getting you to take a photo with a filter on it. It's not just that it's controlling where they spend their attention. Especially social media starts to dig deeper and deeper down to the brainstem and take over kids' sense of self-worth and identity. We evolved to care about whether other people in our tribe think well of us or not, because it matters. But were we evolved to be aware of what 10,000 people think of us? We were not evolved to have social approval being dosed to us every 5 minutes. That was not at all what we were built to experience.
Like it's a drug that's being handed out, but it is in a way a drug, right? And there's research on that as well.
Yeah, there is. And there are a bunch of different aspects to this conversation. And the word addiction gets used in very different ways. And in my mind, that word itself is not the point. The point is that they are designed to get us to come back. It's to figure out and reverse engineer what are the things that we're most vulnerable to, that we're most susceptible to come back. And what we are seeing, there's a dopamine response in the brain. So as we use these highly dopaminergic devices that give us a lot of dopamine as we use them, we get used to a different baseline.
I'm sure.
And so when you don't have those things, you actually feel a greater withdrawal. It's sort of like the seesaw that's constantly looking for balance. And if you keep piling on more dopamine on one side, the seesaw needs to balance itself out. But if you don't have that, you end up feeling very, very out of balance. I think that's something, as we were learning about that from one of the experts in the film, Dr. Anna Lemke, it was becoming so evident in my own life, just how I could feel like if I wasn't using, I was a very, very heavy social media user throughout the 2016 election and soon after that. And then when working on the film, I started to see.
What was your platform?
For me, Facebook was my weak link. I mean, I was on a bunch of them, but Facebook was the one that just kept pulling me back. And I think this is another thing. It's like every one of these platforms kind of reverse engineers and optimizes for a different type of person. Some people like Instagram is the drug of choice. For other people, Snapchat is the drug of choice. For some people, it's YouTube. For some people, it's different, right? But for me, it was Facebook and the affirmation I was getting there and the posts I was seeing and the information and news that I was getting from that particular platform. So for me, political information was a fire hose. And when I started working on this movie, I got to see, wait a second, what am I seeing and why? I learned from one of our subjects that Russia was pushing out anti-fracking propaganda. And I was like, wait a second, I am not particularly a fan of fracking, but what am I hearing and why do I believe what I believe? And how am I getting all this input into my life that I mean, I'm not fact checking when I, see the post or I just see the headline that's constantly coming in. So it really made me feel like being on these platforms was making me a less informed citizen, that I was actually hurting my insights and my knowledge. It was pushing me down a particular path that was making it more and more difficult for me to engage with somebody that I might have disagreed with, because they're also getting pushed down an opposite path and hearing opposing perspectives that I wasn't seeing, and vice versa. One of the things that I've been suggesting to people, if there's somebody in your life that you disagree with, do a reality swap and take their phone and give them your phone and say, hey, you check my social media, let me check your social media. This is something that I did with one of our co-writers on the film early on. And we were good friends, had loads of mutual friends, had very similar politics, but our feeds were completely different. And I was seeing completely different stuff than she was. And that was just a huge light bulb for me. Like, the idea of getting customized and personalized news just seems pretty problematic if we're trying to have a society that needs to come together around shared conversations and a shared sense of truth and facts to be able to make difficult decisions on what we want to do as a society.
Yeah. I mean, you're preaching to the choir here, because I run a news organization, and that is
exactly.
I believe, and I want people to come to our platform to read it, and not to just read pieces of it and, you know, angles of it off of Facebook, off of somebody, what was recommended to them. But to me, that ship has sailed, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Although we do have a huge number of people who do come to our platform and then yell at us when we're on Drudge. But let's just get to, in the remaining minutes we have, where you've gotten to in your mind. I think that your film does a tremendous job of really clearly elucidating the problems and the risks that we are living in. They're not down the road, they're contemporary, they're right now. But those platforms are in the hands of, you know, in Facebook's case, one shareholder, Mark Zuckerberg. In the case of Twitter, Jack Dorsey does seem to have been awoken somehow to the risks and problems on this platform. And then on the other hand, you have the possibility of government regulation. But it seems to me that with that public pressure has not really been working very effectively. Intelligent people coming together and saying, there's a problem here, Mark, and Sheryl Sandberg, what are you going to do about it, has not really gotten very far. So, but it does seem to me that it's possible that people who are in the community, who you are putting on camera, could say, oh, okay, it could perhaps like flip a switch somewhere in the power structure of those companies. Or do you think we need government regulation? That's the only way that this is going to at all change. I'm not even sure if it understands the stuff that.
Right. I think it's a little bit of both. In an ideal world, I think that the executives at these companies would have a moral and ethical reckoning with what has been built, and work internally to change it, and ideally work internally to change it on their own terms too, that they have more control over how they change it. I think the conversations of what a number of the companies have put out over the course of this year, they're in some cases small steps, in some cases bigger steps, but they're all missing the fundamental problem of the business model. And until they start saying, look, we are going to get off this business model, it's going to be a bumpy road, it's going to take X number of years, this is how we're going to try to do it, this is how we want to rebuild Twitter, how we want to rebuild Facebook, how we want to rebuild Instagram or YouTube. Like, when we get to a place where we're not counting the number of hits, that's not the biggest and most meaningful metric. How do we
But what
shift
would be
the way?
the incentive? I mean, it just doesn't feel to me like the moral and ethical imperative is going to count against the billions of dollars profit they're making every year.
Just like the moral incentive for certain companies to be environmentally sustainable, that at a certain point the public is going to recognize and catch on to the illusion of what they're selling us, and that there will be moral outrage from the public, as I feel like there should be.
There is.
And so either it comes internally or it comes through government regulation. Those really are the only options, and either they do it like with control over how they want to shift and switch to what kind of business model, or it's forced upon them, right? So I think those are the conversations that we're having, and I think the goal of the film is just to be able to bring together a societal conversation around, like, look, this doesn't work for humanity. We need it rebuilt. The people who designed it might not be the ones who have the solutions. Let's bring in a much broader group of people who are thinking about what solutions look like. There are many amazing academics out there that have been working on this issue for a very, very long time that have a lot of thoughts around how this could be built in a different way. Like, we need to have a completely ground up rethinking of how we get ourselves out of this problem. with climate change, with the analogy there, we have to move from an extractive industry to a regenerative industry. And we know it's so blatantly obvious that's the path forward for sustainability on the planet. We need a parallel within the tech industry. What does regenerative technology look like? How do we build technology that actually enhances our societal conversations, that improves civil discourse, that helps us come together and solve problems, and isn't just based on a business model of profit at all costs?
Well, that's very well said. We're out of time, but I'm so glad that you could be here. This is our annual conference about the intersection between technology and entertainment and media, and this is right squarely in the bullseye of what it is that happens when those two powerful forces meet. And thank you for the film, and thank you for being here and being so eloquent.
Thank you so much, Sharon. Yeah.
Thank you. That was fantastic. So to talk about some of the solutions that and what you can do as an individual to address these issues of these massively powerful technology and data behemoths, please welcome Craig Daniloff, who is here with us to talk about his new app called PRIIV. He's the co-founder of the privacy company. He's a serial entrepreneur, and he's been thinking about these issues for some time. And he is here to show us what is one approach to deal with some of these issues. Welcome, Craig.
Hi, thanks.
I think we need to turn your mic on. There you go. Hello.
Oh, hi. Good to be here.
I don't know. Say something. Okay.
Hello?
We got you. Okay. So before we talk, yeah, I hear you. Great. We have a real quick sizzle to sort of show our viewers what PRIIV is. So before we talk about it, I'd like to show everybody what it is real quick.
PRIIV is a new app built to help you understand and manage your personal privacy and security. To begin, PRIIV asks about your devices and apps, risk factors, preferences, and priorities. The app uses this information to calculate your initial privacy score and to determine your current levels of protection. Your personalized privacy path recommends the steps you should take to secure your data and various parts of your digital life. As you follow your path, you'll discover simple changes to take back control, stop data leaks, and prevent companies or others from tracking you. With each step, you'll see your scores rise as your life becomes more private and secure. Choose to upgrade your privacy in specific areas, or focus on individual apps where you'd like to feel better about your privacy and security. PRIIV also helps you discover great software and services that can protect nearly every aspect of your life. Privacy is essential. PRIIV makes it possible.
Great. So, Craig, this is a very intriguing idea. It's also kind of a new domain, isn't it? Like this idea that you need to protect, like take active steps to protect your privacy.
For a lot of people, it is. Unfortunately, this, the 15-year buildup that you mentioned before, it's been slowly, people have been grabbing a little more of our data here and a little more there. And we know our locations being shared, and we know they can see our clicks, but it adds up in ways that we didn't really realize. And so for a lot of people, they accepted the defaults, and the defaults, the settings that the companies provide really aren't in your favor because they're trying to get as much data as they can. So now you have to invest a little energy, a little time to opt into privacy instead of, opt out of sharing, which is the default.
But so it's cool. So the idea is I'm going to download this app and it's going to tell me how exposed essentially I am to outside viewing or something.
Yeah, the app, it asks you what devices you have, what social media platforms you're on, what tools you use in general. It covers quite a lot of ground. And then it builds a custom path for you. You also set your goals. Not everybody's the same. Not everyone has the same needs or desires or preferences in terms of privacy. So we ask a few questions and figure that out. And then it says, okay, so here's the first things you should do. It's a lot like a fitness program or weight loss or something where the goal is going to take a while. but you need to just take steps and you'll make progress. And the nice thing about this is the first steps have the biggest impact. Securing your accounts and changing a few settings. Like, you talked about Facebook earlier with Jeff. People can go in and change 3 or 4 settings on Facebook and cut off a big part of the information they're using to build that model of you. And so the idea is, again, you can protect yourself. Just no one has shown you how. The companies didn't have an interest in making it easy. So we show you how. We're increasingly going to automate it, and we help you pick the tools you need to add protection to different parts of your life.
So in other words, like when you get your phone, because that's, I think where most of us are using these things, right? Also on your desk, laptop or whatever, but particularly your phone. I want to just point out this funny thing. We were prepping for the conference, and one of the speakers on day one is Kara Swisher, who's the tech columnist, or she's an op-ed columnist at the New York Times, and has been at TheGrill many times. Anyway, one of the people on our team mentioned Kara Swisher out loud, said her name, and her phone served up an ad for Kara's new podcast, which was like completely creepy. That stuff like happens all the time. But there are ways to stop that. Like, can they stop listening to it? Like, your phone's listening to you, right?
Well, the listening one is controversial. I really don't believe they are listening. But what I always say about that is it's worse than they're listening, which is they don't even need to listen. They know so much about you. They know so much about where you go and who your friends are and what you've been doing and reading, that chances are good. Usually you can explain those things in another way, than the listening. But the metaphor is still accurate. They are still capturing this enormous amount of data about you, and you can turn off, 80 or 90% of one slice of it, right? There are things they're going to know if you clicked on a story, right? That you can't stop them from knowing that.
Right.
But let's just take one really easy example that's got a lot of press: location tracking, right? Your phone is telling many companies, and it's not one company, right? They trade this data. They aggregate it over time. They share it with each other. They build this big profile. They put it in a computer and run algorithms and models against it. So the fact that you chose a restaurant or you were in a neighborhood, the neighborhood has an income level. There's all this data that gets filtered in and is then comes back and used against you. If you and I were in LA together and we were together 2 or 3 times, Facebook knows that both our phones were in those locations at the same time, multiple times. They now know we know each other. That's how they suggest those things. They patented an algorithm to check the pace at which we're walking down a street, that if we're walking at the same gait down the same street, we probably know each other. So we're sharing more than we need to. You can turn off your location tracking really easily on your phone. Now, you need it when you want your maps on, but all the rest of the day, it's giving out, a TV station did a little experiment one day, and they saw that your phone tells Google where you are 12,000 times before lunch. Now, in and of itself, you think, I don't care, I'm not hiding anything.
Right.
But they're using that data to profile you psychologically, politically, all these ways. So the point is, opt out. The first, solution to the problems raised in the movie, which is certainly complicated in the larger sense. But why share more than you need to when they're weaponizing that data and aiming it back at you? And the reason people don't stop is they don't know how. And so we sat down a couple of years ago and said, well, let's make it easy to do. And let's help people do it a step at a time in a personalized way so that there's a choice. Waiting for the government is not the best option.
Yeah, I'm not confident the government really, honestly, I was starting to say this before, really grasps the complexities, because I don't know that people, at least not the Congress people and the senators themselves, are using this stuff in the way that, say, a younger person is using it. Maybe AOC is using it, but I mean, I don't think Chuck Grassley is using it, is my point. So, I mean, you can just tell by some of the questions that they ask in the congressional hearings. It's kind of, so, and is this something that is is a new, I guess I'm asking, like, there are like privacy lock or life lock. There are other things that is that similar to this, or is this a different thing?
LifeLock is primarily identity theft, which has been an issue for 10 or 15 years, and it's sort of the last generation. We think of this as privacy theft. In fact, we've echoing their phraseology, but what your risk now is people getting your data. Identity theft is a very narrow band, so that's not so much what this is. This is about the kind of tracking that goes on because of your phone, because of the devices you have in your home, because of the business models that have evolved, as Jeff was mentioning. And so it's kind of, in a way, it's new in the sense that this is a product that focuses on protecting your privacy.
Well, I should point out, you just launched it like 6 weeks ago, you said, so it's brand new for you.
The tool PRIIV is free in the App Store, just PRIIV, and that's only been in the App Store for 6 weeks. And we're about to launch the next phase of this, which is software bundles, which is where this isn't new. There's been password managers, for 20 years. Penetration is still pretty low, like less than 20% of people use a password manager. And if you don't have a secure password on your account and people can get in and either steal your data or change settings, you have a lot of risk. And so we help people to buy and understand and use those things effectively, because in many cases, you can install something that really protects you.
Well, that's really fascinating. Thank you so much. It's like perfect end cap to the conversation with Jeff. This has been fascinating. Thank you to Craig, and thank you again to Jeff for being here and talking about these really, really big issues that affect every single one of us. To our viewers, that wraps it up for this particular panel. Please join us again at 5:30. We're going to have a panel that's open to the public with a dozen different innovators from our innovators list. These are groundbreaking new companies that are bringing new ideas and new technologies and new cultural moments to our world. And we're excited to meet so many of them. So I'll see you again at 5:30.